Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris Lopez. I'm a realtor over at Earcastle Real Estate and also run the denverinvestmentrealestate.com website. So the goal of the website and this webinar is to provide practical education and information that is Denver focused and also help with networking, meeting other investors, meeting other professionals, because as everyone knows, the more people you know, the better it is for investing purposes. So with that in mind, please ask questions. We love them. We want this webinar to be interactive. So just like as if you're sitting in a real classroom, feel free to just type in a question in the Q&A box. I'll be moderating those and we'll stop every couple minutes or at the end of each slide and answer those questions. So don't be shy, ask away. And if for some reason you've got a question that pops in your mind after the webinar, reach out to me, reach out to Annemarie, reach out to whoever, and we'll do our best to get your question answered or forward it on to someone else that can. So again, please just ask questions. And if you can't make it through the whole webinar, or you want to come back and listen to it again, I post the recording on YouTube. So that actually be the webinar itself, the screen recording. And the same link you registered, denverinvestmentrealestate.com/webinar14, will forward you to the YouTube channel or the YouTube playlist. And I also take the audio and put it onto our podcast channel. So I personally love podcasts way more than recorded webinars because I listen to hundreds of podcasts a year. Well, I probably watch like 2 or 3 recorded webinars every year. So if you're like me and like to listen while you're driving around town or walking the dogs, go to your podcast channel and search for Denver Real Estate Investing Podcast, and you'll see our house with the headphones on there. That's our podcast channel. So our topic today is the 411 of leasing around Denver with Annemarie Sunde. So Annemarie is the owner of Legacy Property Management, and she and her team have over 30 years of experience in real estate and property management. So Annemarie, welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And I'm going to switch over screens right now, everyone. So bear with us 5 seconds. All right, so while we're switching over screens, again, everyone, please, if you got any questions, feel free to ask them and we'll jump into it. So I see your screen, Annemarie, so you are good to go. Take it away.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming and joining us. This is a little different from a webinar standpoint, so I really do encourage, I teach this in the classroom for those real estate agents on the line. This is a 2 CE credited class by Dora. And so we have a lot of fun. I really love the interaction. So I would encourage you to ask away and have some conversation with me. We'll jump right into it, but let me just tell you why I developed this webinar and class. What I was finding when we do a lot of property management in town is there are a lot of folks, whether you're a licensed real estate agent or an investor or a self-managing owner, that are leasing properties on their own. Totally understandable, totally fine. We oftentimes get what we call inherited tenants. And those inherited tenants are placed under a lease that I might not consider very protective of a property manager and especially an owner. And so rather than quote unquote fight the system and try to capture all of the possibilities of leasing every property in town, because that would not be realistic, I decided to embrace the system and help people and be a resource so that you are thinking about things when you are leasing a property either for a client or for yourself. And thus, this is the class that we're talking about. We will talk a little bit about fair housing. I'm not sure how many agents are online. That can get pretty boring for us agents because we are fair housed to death. But we will talk a little bit about it and things to think about and remember. So I'm assuming that most of us know what a lease is, but let's just really quickly set the stage. I'm not into reading slides, so I will talk to you a little bit about the slide. Really, it's the contract between the landlord and the tenant, and it's setting the responsibilities that a landlord has to a tenant and the tenant has to the owner. In that, is a sum of money that's exchanged with the assumption that this tenant now gets to live in the landlord's asset or property. That's really what a lease is. In the state of Colorado, leases, it is a pro-tenant state. That's not something to be afraid of, but it's something that if your lease is not tight, we have what we love to refer to as professional tenants out there, and they know how to work a system. So protecting you as the owner or landlord is probably one of my number one, and as a property manager managing for an owner, really important. So what happens when you lease up a property? Well, it is definitely not this gentleman sitting back in a recliner saying, thanks for paying my mortgage, and he's going to smoke his cigar and hang out until that money rolls in. We all know that we have an asset, and those assets require maintenance. You can't just sit back and hope that the house is going to purr along. More importantly, now you have people living in your home. Don't know if you've ever heard the statement, everybody lives differently, but as a property manager and the stuff that I have seen over my years, I actually wrote a book on it because I cannot truly make up the stuff that happens in a house. And it truly is true that everybody lives so differently. I'll give you an example. I manage a beautiful home in Greenwood Village. These owners lived in that house. It was their first home for 9 years. The first day we rented the property to a very nice couple, she happened to be a very large bath taker to the tune of every single night took a bath. 3 days into the lease, into them living there, the entire tub opened up into the family room below. And the owners said, oh my gosh, that's never happened. And I said, were you bath takers? No, we never used it once in 9 years. And there I rest my point in my case. Everybody lives differently. And so knowing how to respond, how are you going to make repairs? How are you selecting tenants? How are you collecting rent? What is habitable and inhabitable? This is something that, uninhabitable, this is something that tenants love to stand on. They think they know because an ice maker doesn't work, they can't live in the house. This is not a true statement. The furnace doesn't work. This is a true statement. It makes it uninhabitable. So I would recommend first and foremost, you're going to list a home for lease. You need to set what your parameters are. What is your thresholds? What are you evaluating somebody on when they apply for a property? This is important, especially if you are pulling criminal credit and eviction. This is actually regulated by the FTC. There are pretty strict guidelines on when you are accepting or declining somebody that has given you their social security number and permission to pull a background check. In fact, if you decline someone, you are required by the FTC to send they call it a tenant rejection letter. And they're online, it's a standard form. I do recommend using the standard form. It's much easier, keeps you out of a court of law. Just check the boxes of why you're declining somebody. What is your threshold or guideline for credit report or credit score? Is it 600, 650? My threshold is 650. Everything that I evaluate a tenant an applicant on is listed on my website. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't, I guess the word I'm looking, I can't think of the word, bend the rules, but it gives people that are applying an understanding of, wow, if my credit score is at 500, I'm likely not going to get selected for this property. And so do I want to spend whatever you charge to apply for a property? Do they want to spend that? They need to know and understand that up front. Some folks have, yeah.
Speaking of the credit score, so you said 650 for yours. Is that kind of a blanket use across all your properties from, I'll say, higher end properties to lower properties, or does that fluctuate based on the property, the property numbers?
That's a good question. It does not fluctuate. I love to see 650 or higher. Let's be real. I will go down to 600, and if I'm in between 600 and 650, usually for my owners, I will 1.5 times the security deposit for a protection basis. Typically, people that are below 600, they've got to have a really darn good reason. So what we do is we personally show every single applicant into our home, into the properties that we are listing. There's a couple reasons for that. I do not allow any self shows. That's a new thing in property management. They throw a lockbox on, they get a driver's license from an applicant, and they give them a lockbox code, usually a central lock. If you're not familiar, that's a coded system. And they allow tenants, applicants, to show their property on their own. They're walking around your asset on their own. I still can't get my brain around why anyone would do that. But more importantly, one of the reasons we personally show one of my staff or myself is because we treat every showing as if it's an interview to live in that home. So we size them up, and we really, really ask a lot of questions. I mean, let's be honest here. When you get an application for a property, it's Joe Schmo, his date of birth, his social security number. He holds a job. Maybe he's going to verify that job with W-2 or pay stubs. And he's got a couple pets and a car. These are the people he's going to live with. But that really doesn't tell me anything about Joe. So I want to know who Joe is. Why are you moving? What are you looking to do? What do you do? This is where we find out. Nowhere on my application does it ask, do you have a prescription to grow? No no properties that I manage allow growing, smoking, vaping, or anything of the kind. But it's usually in the showing that they will disclose that. So I like to meet, or my staff meets, every single person that looks at a property. We take a lot of time to vet out tenants. So it makes me really sad when I hear people say, these tenants have trashed my house. That knock on wood has not happened to me. So to answer
we got one more question here from Andrew. Andrew says, with whom do you recommend contacting to perform these background checks?
So I have it set up. Most property management companies kind of go through a whole they come out to your office, they do an inspection. Everything has to be locked because I hold so many properties. If you're doing the one-offs or you're self-managing, many will require the tenant to go ahead and pay for it themselves. There's different online systems that can do a credit, criminal, a background check. Some will run eviction. If you're using a property manager, they should have their own system. The system I use is Clear Choice.
Do you have any recommendations for websites for the self-managers out there?
I'm trying to think of, I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have to think about it while we're going, and I can look at that. There's one at the tip of my tongue, and I'm sure when we're talking, I'll come up with it.
Great, thank you.
To answer your question, or the person that asked about the threshold and as it changes with property. So I manage everything from a condo downtown at about 1,800, a one-bedroom condo for 1,400 in Wash Park, all the way to a $2 million home at $12,000 a month. So you can, and our primary focus is single-family homes. So you can well imagine that someone living in a $12,000 home is probably not the same as a 1,400. Now, Wash Park brings in professionals more so than something like in Aurora. You are correct in that something in Aurora is not going to bring a 650 credit score. But this is why I say they need to have a really good reason why. And if you're an agent, we talk about the love letters in real estate. In my world, we talk about financial statements. And I ask them, not financial statements from a financial guy, but I ask them to write me a letter on why they are at where they're at financially. and explain it to me in your own words why you are there and what are you doing to overcome that. And so it's kind of our property manager love letter. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that's it. That does. Thank you.
Okay, so for those that are not familiar with the protected classes of fair housing, there are 7. And you know, I won't get into real specific of what each of them are, but let me just make one note here. Sex offenders, felons, that's a felony, is not a protected class. Think that's important. You know, it's all about, you know, how are you discriminating, but you do not have to offer somebody that is going to have a very difficult time finding a place to live because they are a sex offender. You do not have to offer your property for them to live in. That does not need to become your problem as of today. That is not a protected class. That has come up, and I actually have had a sex offender inherited tenant, and I did evict him or ask him to leave because it was a duplex with a family going in, and I couldn't have a sex offender on the other side.
So how did you, I'm curious, like how do you, was it like he on a month-to-month lease, or did you have to buy him out of the lease? Like how do you make that work?
He was on a month-to-month.
Okay.
He was an inherited tenant. An owner bought the investment property, and owner decided not to continue. So it was just a 30-day notice to quit.
Now, if the sex offender was on, like, say, had 11 months left on his lease, what could you have done?
That's going to be trickier because you know, the hard part about that is you really can't evict him for that reason. And what that does to the other side of that property being a duplex, if it was a single family home, you know, he's identified as in this, whatever the database is anyways. But to have a duplex with a family going into, and I mean, this duplex was 4 bedrooms on one side, 3 bedrooms on the other. It was a family home. And I knew I was going to have kids going in on the other side. And I knew what his crime was. So I'm very thankful that that was not the case. You probably can evict him based on that stature. He's living there. He's under a protected lease. This guy was not.
Okay.
And the other thing is he was highly under rented. He was renting. It was a 16-year lease, and he was still paying the same amount 16 years ago of $920 a month. It was crazy.
Wow.
So, yeah. It was pretty easy. There was a pretty good case for me to get him out, but thankfully, that was it. So fair housing, we all, you know, I'm going to make sure, because I don't know if there's people that are self-managing. It's the act of treating someone differently and negatively is what discrimination is. So this is something as licensed agents, we have to abide by. This is something we cannot do. There are some exceptions, and I'm going to talk about who is exempt in fair housing, and it might be applicable on this webinar. But you know, if I am going to have a property, let's say the best fair housing law to stay to is if you have a 3-bedroom home, it's 2 people per bedroom plus 1. So if you have a 3-bedroom home, you're allowed 2, 4, 6 plus 1, 7 people to live in the property. Now, we start to get into issues with, are they related? Are they not related? That definitely comes into play. I am not a proponent of roommate scenarios. It's got to be a really good, convincing reason why I would put, you know, 4 college students into a property. That's just my personal opinion, because it's never just the college kids. But let's just talk about, oftentimes I will inherit a property. I will give you an example. A 2-bedroom, 1 bath had 10 people living in there. They were all family, and I had to take them out. That is way too many people in one house. So there is a law that says you have to abide by two people per bedroom plus 1. It's probably the easiest way to decline a tenant that is looking, or an applicant looking at a property and it's too many people coming in. Or if they move in and you go and inspect and you see there's too many people living here, you can't do that. They need to be identified on the lease. So I don't know if that's answering. Now, you do have some of this. As agents, we have to be careful on how we advertise. If you are advertising in a community such as Heritage Eagle Bend out east, where that one is actually a 45 plus. I do manage 2 properties there. If it's HOA driven and set, then you can advertise that way, but you got to be careful with, I do get owners saying, I don't want any kids in the house. Okay, well, we know as agents, none of us can say no children, none of us. So, you know, you have to be careful about that. Hopefully that's kind of clear. What is applicable to fair housing? Pretty much everything: sales, rental, advertising of dwellings. I mean, if it's a place where you can live, it's applicable to fair housing. So let's talk a little bit about who is exempt. People that are exempt, first and foremost, if you're an agent on this webinar, you are not exempt. If you're leasing up a property for a client, you are not exempt. You must abide by fair housing. If the owner does not have more than, they are self-managing, self-leasing, and they don't have more than 3 single-family homes, then they are exempt. And then the last item would be if the owner does not occupy one of the units in a multifamily, whether it's half of a duplex or a 4-plex and he's in one, then he is under fair housing laws. But if he is not in there, then he can be exempt.
Sorry, okay. Say that again.
So let's say you have a 4-plex. Owner lives in one unit renting, and then he's renting the other 3 units. If that is the case, he is under a fair housing law.
Okay.
He is not exempt. So the 4-plex has to be all leased to somebody else. He's not living there, then he's exempt. Okay. Okay, so this is one of my favorite.
We got a couple questions around there. So in this example, because I know there's a lot of investors out there that, you know, they're buying a duplex, living in one side, renting out the other side, or they buy a home and they live in the master bedroom and rent out the other bedrooms. So I've talked to a few people now that are getting, you know, they're planning to buy a property every year or 2 and do it for 3, 4, 5 properties. And some of those people have gotten the real estate license, not to become an agent, but basically to be able to just kind of do their own deals to save a few bucks. So yeah. If in that scenario, you get a licensed agent, but he's living in a single family home, renting out the other bedrooms, where does that fall at?
And it's an agent?
It's, I'll say, yeah, it's an agent that's, you know, it's a part-time agent. It's a licensed person.
Yeah, but once you get the license, you better stay under fair housing. I mean, here's the thing. Fair housing, people can go to you know, the courts with fair housing issues. But if you're an agent, you're now going to pile yourself on with DORA complaints. It doesn't matter if you're part-time or full-time. You're still a licensed real estate agent that is now being regulated by the Real Estate Commission. So you can get fined from the Real Estate Commission as well as the courts. And I'm just going to tell you, I mean, I've had a lot of agents say, well, I self-manage and this is what I do. And I just went, wow, like I don't know that. I had a lady sitting in my class that said, I have a 2-story condo, and the man that was looking at it, he pretty much had to crawl up the stairs. So I said, do you really think this is the right place for you to live? And I said, my eyes just bugged out. I said, I would never say that. What do you care if he's crawling up and down the stairs? You can't tell him that he can't live that way. She says, well, what if he gets himself hurt? And I said, he hurts himself. That's not your problem. You cannot show, and as a licensed agent, she could have been in really big trouble. Luckily, he was too elderly or whatever to care about what she was saying to him, but I just wouldn't say it. I mean, once you hold a real estate license, it's almost like we put a little bit more liability on ourselves, and we have to tread the waters a little bit carefully.
Okay, so that's good to know.
So if you're going to rent a house with you living in there, you better stay with fair housing. I mean, I don't know why you would do that, but that's neither here nor there.
So a couple more questions. Oh,
yeah. Go ahead.
so
Go ahead.
Brian asked, so if I, as a personal investor without a license, owns less than 3 properties, I don't have to follow fair housing.
Correct. Less than 3 single families. If you're owning multiplexes like apartment complexes, that's different. They have multiple units in one property. Different. Single family homes. Less
And
than 3.
And for clarification, that means a house, a condo, a townhome is a single family home, right?
That's what I treat it as. Yes.
Right.
If you own like a building of 5 condos, treat each one of those as separate single family homes, and now you've exceeded 3. To be safe, I mean, once you're at 5 properties, everything changes, including where you're holding security deposits if you're self-managing. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion that we can have in a little bit about who's holding security deposits. But there are laws once you hit 5 on where the deposits are being held as well.
So one more question here from Fed. He says, I have an up-down home with an apartment on top and an apartment and basement. My basement tenant makes a lot of noise. Can I evict this tenant for always disrupting the tenant upstairs with his noise?
Is it in the lease? That would be my first question. Is quiet enjoyment and disruption of neighbors or other tenants in the lease? If it is, yes, he's violating your contract and you can begin an eviction process. You must do warnings. And we can talk a little bit about in this webinar, a little bit about the eviction process. I do all the evictions for my company. I do not have my property managers spend time, and it is time consuming to evict tenants. At some point, I will turn that over, but yeah, we can talk about that. I've evicted on HOA violations. The primary number 1 reason for eviction is, of course, no rent payment, but you can evict on disruption if it's in your lease. So I'd be happy to have a sidebar conversation on that.
Great. All right, thanks. That's the questions we have for now. So thanks.
Okay, I'm sure this will stem some, normally when I sit in class, I ask, as of today, and I'll answer the question, but I'll put it out there. As of today, are emotional support animals protected? Think about it for a minute. Not ADA animals. The answer is no. And I'm sure this is going to have some questions, but let's just clarify the difference between the two, and as agents, what we are allowed to do, and as owners that are not licensed, what you can do. So first, let's start with ADA. The Disabilities Act protects anyone of the handicap, physical or mental. If you have an applicant looking at your property and you cannot see where the handicap is and they are claiming ADA, you may ask politely, could you explain to me where your handicap is? It's important because many times they have animals. And if they have anything with an animal that is related to their ADA, to their handicap, you may not charge pet deposit, pet fees, or pet rent, period. It is a protected class, and so is their animal. And to be very honest with you, every single ADA animal I've ever had in any of my properties, they are so highly trained, they really do not do any damage. They probably do more good because they're keeping the person safe is really what they're trained to do. They're very highly trained. In our showings, if they have an animal, at some point we ask to meet the animal. We want to meet the animal as well as the person. And you're allowed to do that. Now let's talk about emotional support. As anybody, I was just on a plane, literally had a lab in front of me that sprawled himself across 3 people. He did not have his own seat. I love dogs, but I would not have been very happy to have somebody else's dog slobbering in my lap for a 2-hour flight. The most recent one is the turkey that was on the flight, emotional support turkey, and started to attack one of the flight attendants. I think it was Delta or United. Emotional support animals are not a protected class. They're not a protected animal. You can go on Amazon and get an ESR little vest. It's not a protected as of today, and therefore you can charge pet deposit, pet fees, or pet rent.
So you can treat those emotional support animals as pets, and if you have a no pets policy, you don't have to allow them in.
You don't have to. Now, one of the ways we get around, I have had emotionally support animals. Thankfully, they have only been a cat and a dog, nothing crazy like a turkey at this point. And I hope, knock on wood, I don't have to face that. But you can, you know, they will present to you a card that says it's an emotionally support animal, and you want all the documentation. Now, the only time that you really cannot charge something on an emotionally support animal is if they produce the paperwork, the medical paperwork from a licensed, it's usually a psychiatrist when it's an emotionally supported animal, that says this person needs this animal. And in that case, then it's starting to go into, okay, it's getting close to ADA. So you can kind of make the decision of, at this point, we do not, if they produce that documentation, we do not charge a pet deposit or pet rent. But they have that, most of the people have decided that they need this animal, and they have gotten some kind of thing off of Amazon with a little card and a little vest, and that's fine. You know, most of our houses, most of our properties allow an animal, but we're going to charge you a deposit for it. And we typically do not charge pet rent. It kind of depends on the property. That is something that depends on the property. Something at a $12,000 a month, I don't charge pet rent. Something at $1,400 a month, I charge pet rent.
Do you have a breeds list that you go get? I'm getting feedback too. Is I can turn my volume down a little bit from your speaker, Annemarie.
Okay. Yes, we do have a breeds list. You don't want an aggressive breed. I think the list is getting pretty darn lengthy, and I'm kind of one of those people that you know, I love dogs so much. I mean, I'm kind of one of those people that it has a lot to do with the owner that's caring for that animal as to why they're aggressive, but that's neither here nor there. In our pet addendum, if they have what's termed quote unquote an aggressive breed, you know, in Denver, I think it's still that you can't have pit bulls, for example. So we do have to abide by county ordinances. But most of the time, people renting do not have those aggressive breeds. I haven't had to turn somebody down due to an aggressive breed. Does that answer everybody's questions?
Yep, we're good so far.
Okay. So you've been showing the property. You've kind of narrowed down, this is who you want to go with. What do you do now? And you've approved a tenant. So you've run their credit. You feel like they're good. They don't have any kind of background criminal that you're not okay with. And they don't have eviction history, or their rental history is adequate to you as an owner or as an agent. So you're going to develop a lease, and you need to identify these items. Who's paying for the utilities? You know, water is deeded to the house. If they don't pay water, that's a lien on the property. So who's going to watch? I'm not saying that owners need to pay water, but in our workflow process, I get probably 20 water statements a month in my email, and I'm just big brother making sure my tenants are paying. I quickly go through them and see that they're paid. There's no back charges, and we move on. But two things that can put a lien on the property is water and HOA. We always leave HOA with our owners. We never have a tenant pay HOA. It'll be the first thing they don't pay, so don't do it. It's not even worth it. And then water, if it's a single family home and it's not included in the HOA, like a condo, then we watch it. You need to determine how the rent is paid. Are you going to go drive for a check every month? I don't. And so how is that paid? And we're going to talk in a minute about some of the risks of online payment and what happens there. They need to know who to contact in an emergency for maintenance requests. They need to know who the landlord is, especially state law says if you're holding the security deposit, which is what's coming up next we're going to talk about, then state says it's not your money until the tenants move out and you've reconciled the deposit. So theoretically, it's supposed to be held in a separate account once you've exceeded 5 properties. And then important addresses, names, and numbers of how these tenants are going to, behave when they're using your home.
Hey, Annemarie.
So let's talk a little bit about. Yep.
We have a question from the pet slide from Joe.
Sure.
He says, could you repeat what are the charges for pets? And before you answer that question, I'm getting an echo and people are telling me to get an echo. I think, can you turn down your volume speakers so it's not, your microphone's not picking it up? Oh, not all the way. Just turn it down a little bit.
Oh, whoop, hold on.
All right, I think right now that is good. I'm hearing no echo now. So I think that's good.
Okay, so now I got to find my PowerPoint. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, so
all right, are we better?
Yeah, thanks everyone. So the question from Joe was, could you repeat what are the charges for pets? The pet rent, pet deposit, things like that.
Sure. So typically on a pet deposit, there is no guideline or set amount that you can charge or for a pet deposit. I will tell you, when we started, we used to charge $250. Now we are not less than $300. And some of this, because I run the gamut of such large spans from a $1,400 condo up to a $12,000 house, it's a little bit of what kind of property they're in as well. So usually I won't charge over $500. And by the way, that will be, it's $300 to $500 per pet. Okay, it's not total. So let's say you have a person going into a house that's got 3 dogs. I probably would charge $750 to $1,000 for those pets. Now, I don't always charge pet rent. Again, if I do, I charge $25 per month per pet. The difference between a pet rent and a pet deposit, deposits in the state of Colorado must remain refundable. Security and pet deposits must be refundable for the duration of the lease. You cannot do a non-refundable deposit ever. People do it, it's not legal. But you can do a pet rent. And oftentimes, this is what I tell my property managers. If someone comes in and looks at a property, and it's usually something under $2,500 or $2,800 a month, they'll say, "Oh, is there pet rent?" And if they ask, I say, "Yep, there is." That's the best way to get some extra revenue into your pocket. And that's why we have an investment property, to be really honest with you. I have 4 of them my own, and if they are going to ask me, then they are used to paying, and I'm going to say yes. Yep, pet rent, $25 per pet per month. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that kind of just brought up a really just maybe left field scenario. So let's say security deposit's $1,000 and pet deposits $500. Unit's great, but the pet just destroys all the carpet. The cat just pees on everything and does $2,000 worth of damage. Can you retain the entire security deposit and pet deposit because it's the animal, or can you only retain $500 from the pet deposit?
No, you can. That's the biggest misnomer. I mean, the deposit's the deposit. I don't care if it says pet or security deposit. If there's damage to the property, I'm going to start with what I've got held. And what a lot of owners that are self-managing don't know is that look, if you have a $450,000 house now, which is the average house price in Denver, and you are renting it at $2,700, and you collect a deposit because their credit score is good of 650 and above, so you collect the deposit which matches the rent of $2,700. There is no way if they trash that house, $2,700 is going to cover it. So whether it's from a pet or not, you use the money that you have, and if it's exceeding, you reconcile within what your lease states, and we can talk about that, but it should say 60 days. Give yourself 60 days in your leases. These owners that give themselves 30 days are just destroying themselves. You cannot reconcile within 30 days, and if you don't reconcile by the date you state in your lease, you will lose that amount plus 3 times, according to the court, if you don't reconcile by your deadline date. That's another point. But nevertheless, you reconcile. If they get nothing back and there's additional funds that need to be covered, expenses on the property, then you know there's a process, but it's kind of like you need an attorney and you go after them for additional funds, but it's worth it if they've destroyed your property. And most people don't. They just keep the deposit and they move on.
So Jim asked, do you ever have both a pet deposit and pet rent for a property?
Yes. Yes, on the lower, probably 2,700 and below. If they, like I said, if they ask about pet rent, I charge it. It's more money in your pocket. You get to keep pet rent. You don't ever have to pay that back. That is rent. So, okay. Good questions though. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about security deposit. If you're self-managing, it is imperative that to identify who the holder is, how to get a hold of you, what your phone number is, email, I mean, everything. It is state law that they know where their deposit money is. Most owners put it in their bank account, they spend it. Just be prepared when they move out, you better be able to come up with the security deposit again. For us, we are obligated to hold it in escrow, and it sits in a completely different account in escrow until until I reconcile and the tenants move out. Usually the question that comes up here is interest that is accrued on the deposit, who gets it? I don't have an interest-bearing account, so I don't even have to talk about it. I get tenants asking, do I get the interest? No, because it's a non-interest-bearing account. That's just more brain damage to me. And then how are you going to accept the funds? Excuse me, is it going to be a check? Do you trust their checks? Is it a certified funds? If you are collecting checks, I would recommend you require a bank check, not a check written. You are handing over an asset. In our system, they must pay their deposit through my system online, and they must pay it by a certain deadline date. It's an ACH transfer that is a minimum of a bank-to-bank transfer of 3 days. So we usually require 5 days. I'm not going to give them the house unless I know those funds are real in my account. And security deposits, people oftentimes, if I have to 1.5 times a security deposit, increase the deposit because they have low credit score, they love to ask, can I split my deposit in a couple of months? Well, they better at least pay me the entire 1 month of rent deposit plus their move-in rent, and maybe I'll let them pay the other half a month of deposit the second month. But it's pretty rare. I don't like turning an asset over without the full deposit.
So question on here. So Brian says this is as a private investor with less than 3 units or 3 single family homes. Do you have to keep security deposits in a separate account for every property, or can I have one account for all the security deposits?
No, you don't have to. You do not have to. If you're under 5 properties, you do not have to separate your security deposits out. I do recommend, however, having each property in their own separate. The way I do it is I have a separate LLC for each property with its own bank account. Those are my own personal properties that I run. Now their deposits happen to be in my company's security deposit escrow account, but for you, you could put that deposit in its own entity account. But the big thing is the big thing that you get caught on is, and especially for agents, is the commingling. You know, agents that are doing real estate and property management, that's where Dora really gets themselves upset, because they can commingle between real estate transaction and property management. But for an owner, or us, where we only do property management, it's just the ability to account for, reconcile each statement per property. That's really what a DORA or a court system, you know, you have rents coming in. How are you documenting? You should be creating a rent roll, whatever that looks like. You know, I mean, and my 80-year-old dad, he does it on a ledger by hand. Fine. A court will take that. But for us, we do it all electronically. However, you are documenting that rent comes in and you're receipting that, if they're not doing it on an online system where they get an auto receipt. Many owners will do set up like Chase Pay, ePay, or First Bank's got their own little system, and many of those send a confirmation receipt back to the tenant once they've paid their rent. That's fine. They've got a receipt. You don't need to generate a separate one. So for us, they get a confirmation receipt that they've paid their rent on my online system. Okay, so there's some pitfalls about an owner holding the security deposit. And really, this is something that it's not your money. That's probably the number one thing. What I see a lot of owners do, because I get hired as a third party, it's not my favorite thing to do, but I used to do a lot of them where I would do the third party move out inspection and reconciliation of the deposit. What I have experienced in my years of property management is that, especially if this home that you are now renting used to be your primary home, there's an emotional attachment to it. And so when someone damages it, even some scuffs on the wall, which would be considered wear and tear, owners will overcharge. You don't want to do that. Don't overcharge. It's not something you need to be scared of, but there are some really good resources online. We actually give a portion of the tenant landlord handbook that's online, because they have a really nice chart in there that says what is damage and what is wear and tear. If it's damage, you can reconcile it on the deposit. And it gives loads of examples, from gouge in the floor to a lost key to countertops. I mean, all kinds of examples. There's probably about 40 examples that would fall under the damage column. And we tell our tenants, if it's in the damage column, I can reconcile it on the deposit. If it's in the wear and tear, likely I will not. The big thing these days is the mounted TVs. Those things create more problems in a property, and everybody mounts TVs. So I personally have decided it costs my owners about $200, $250 to patch, retexture, and paint it by my painter. So I started charging for that. To me, that's excessive. If you're doing something different, it's no different than if you decided to paint a wall and you didn't get permission and you've got a purple wall now. We have to take that back to neutral. I'm going to charge the tenant for it. Now, what happens if you overcharge? Well, if your tenant just takes it and says, okay, whatever, then you're fine. If they decide to fight you on your charges and you end up litigating on your charges, and the courts rule in favor of the tenant, you not only lose the amount you charged them, but you lose 3 times the amount of the security deposit. It's not a fun process. So I just highly recommend you have to be very, you can't have any emotional attachment. Be very business-like. This is a business transaction. I'm going to be fair with it. And never get comfortable with your tenants. Never. Never. Are there any questions on that?
Nope, none coming in yet. So if you guys do have questions, keep them coming.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about fees, because I think that a lot of times this is where owners, and it took me a while to learn this as well, to be very honest with you, where you can obtain fee charges that you should not be paying for. So we charge an application fee. It costs us money to apply, for them to apply, and to run the background. We pay for the credit report check, the full background check, so they're going to pay us. We verify revenue sources. We call references. Of course, our favorite reference is a past landlord, but many tenants coming into the state of Colorado have no rental history, by the way, because they're selling somewhere else and they're all moving to Colorado. So, what are you going to do? So you can charge an application fee. If you look and go and poll some apartment complexes, some of their application fees can be very extravagant. We charge $75 and we've raised that this year from $50. And I think it's still very fair. We get no balking from that fee. We do charge late fees on leases that I have inherited and reviewed. Late fees is the one area that I just don't understand why people don't get tougher on. I charge, if you're going to miss your rent, I charge $100 the first day and $25 a day additional until they pay. And that includes if they bounce a check or their payment that they've paid online gets rejected. Now they've got late fees on top of their rent payment. And for me, I split all late fees with my owners. You don't want them to have late fees, but what I have found is over my years, if I see a lot of this $25 or $50 the first day and $10 every day after, who cares? People just, that's like a Band-Aid, they rip it off and they keep moving. I mean, make it hurt so they don't keep doing it. They are violating a contract. Return check fee, that is all kept by us, because when that happens, I'm paying fees because they bounced a check. So we don't share that fee. This is a fancy word of saying eviction fee. So the fee that I charge to the tenants, it's in their lease, is the posting fee. It's any notice that I would have to post on them. And that's usually, either it's a notice for compliance or eviction. It's a 3-day notice. It's a state mandatory notice if they haven't paid rent. A court processor posts it, and I charge them $75 for every time that happens. And then there's some of the other ones. I really don't charge administrative fees, reconnect fees, ReKeying fees. If they lose keys or have to replace locks, comes out of their deposit. I do charge that. A holdover fee is if you let your lease go month to month, you can charge a holdover fee, and that rental amount will go up. So mine is 110% of the rent amount that they're paying. I don't ever let my rents go month to month, though. That puts my owners at too much risk, and I could end up having to get somebody out in an awkward time of the year that would probably promote more vacancy than it's worth getting the money of 110%. So I just don't. We're talking to our tenants 60 days prior to lease term. What are you doing?
We got a couple questions here, Annemarie. So I'll start with the holdover fee question, since that's what we just touched on. You said 110%. So simple numbers, say $1,000 is the rent. The lease ends, they go month to month. Next month is $1,100. And then the second month to month, does it stay at 110% of that original rent, or is it constantly increasing 10% every month?
No, it stays at the 10. It just goes up that one, and then it stays there. So 1,100. Okay. You can't keep doing it. 110 is pretty steep, by the way. I have contract review with, I have 2 attorneys retained, one for eviction, one for contracts and litigation of security deposit. And that fee used to be higher, and that you'll see a lot of holdover fees at around 125%. That's excessive charging. If you got taken into court, a court might not rule for you. So be careful there.
Good to know.
It's an inconvenience if you go month to month, and so it's intended to protect you, but you can't be too excessive. Again, pro-tenant state, so just be careful.
So this is going back to the previous slide a few minutes ago. Mark asked, where is the list of list of items for the damage that you can keep, security deposits for versus wear and tear items? Is there a list you can point him to, or a list that you can share?
Send me, at the end, I can give you my email. Send me an email and I will send you the document. And I'll make it really easy.
We've got other people that are going to be asking the same question. Should everyone send you an email, or can I post a link on the recording? What's easiest for you?
Why don't I just send it to you and you can post it? Then they don't have to go search the internet. It's a portion of the handbook that the state puts out. But what I love about it is, and make sure if you're going to use it, tenants love to do this. It's really got definitions. What's a lease? What's a security deposit? What are their rights as tenants and as landlord? And then at the end, it has a really cool chart. Now, I have tenants say, well, in the handbook, it said blah, blah, blah. I said, that never, did you sign that thing? That does not supersede your lease that you signed. So but we try to make, here's what I can't stress enough. We set very high levels of expectation for all of our tenants. So we give them the handbook. We give them the habitability law. It's 3 pages long, the Colorado habitability law, because our lease is built off of that. And it will inevitably come up that they can't live because their ridiculous disposal is not working. And they think they need, compensation for rent because they can't have a disposal. I'm so sorry. Or the ice maker is my favorite. I mean, I didn't even have an ice maker when I grew up. I had to make ice. So I have no compassion for that. Now, if they're out on a furnace and it's 10 degrees outside, by God, you better move heaven and earth to get that, and communicate to your tenants. You are moving to get them taken care of. But yes, I'll send it to you, Chris, and however you want to get it. It's on my website too. And at the end of this, you can go to my website, go to the tenant information on my website. You can pull the habitability law off, and you can also pull the handbook. It's both on my website too.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'll link to those so everyone knows. I'll post a link afterwards and get it out there. One more question on the slide. So ReKeying fee, do you rekey your units when a tenant turns over?
Funny you bring that up. Literally just had that whole conversation in staff meeting yesterday. Let me tell you what the lawyer says. ReKey every single time. Let me tell you what my years of experience have been. We don't every time, because owners don't want to spend the money to ReKey, and I don't charge it to my tenants. What I am trying to do is get my owners to go to the smart locks where you can just use the little pin and ReKey, and we just have keys. But it is a little bit of a nightmare. You got 2 to 4 keys for the tenants. If you've got multiple doors on your property, hopefully they all match so you're not juggling a bunch of different keys. We really encourage a mounted lockbox on the property so that anybody in my staff, if there's an emergency, we don't have to figure out how we're going to get the key out of the office. It's on property. So we mount lock boxes on our properties, and that code is only given to our staff and and our owners. Nobody else. No tenants, no contractors have the lockbox code. So ReKeying is kind of it's getting to the point where I really think, and this again, probably shouldn't do this. It's kind of the level of clientele that you're dealing with. But understand that tenants typically will make copies of their keys. So if you think you've collected them all, you probably haven't. So it is a safety issue. And we're getting much better about having more of our properties on the smart lock where we just do a pin and the property manager can actually rekey it without a handyman now. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. So I'm curious now. So like, what's the cost like replacement, just like slipping in that new key? Is that a $5 or $10 part? What is that?
No, if they took the barrel out and took it to took the lock to Home Depot, it's like $5 for Home Depot per lock to rekey it. That would be a physical thing that a handyman would do. I think those smart locks run, I think I was told yesterday, about $70. And then you're just using a pin and a key, whatever key, you know, you're going to swap it to. You stick the pin in, you put the new key in, and now the lock is rekeyed.
Oh, so it's actually the lock changes to fit whatever key you want to use. So you just go buy a key from Home Depot and do that.
Yep.
Oh,
or we just have a batch of keys and we have them per property and we rotate them through. Yeah. I mean, the stories are funny. I mean, there are some old timers that drive around with a box of locks and they just swap them out. So, you know, there's all kinds of things you can do, but changing the locks is probably a really good idea. All right, so I'm not going to get into all the in-depth things of eviction. We could have an entire class on eviction. But if you have a non-contested eviction by a tenant, it should be about 21 days. This squatting and staying in my place for months on end should not happen. Now, when an owner self-manages, what I see is that they're too lenient. And so the courts, by the time they start to get upset, the courts are saying, well, you didn't care that they didn't pay rent for the first 5 months. What do you care now? We're not going to rush. So my message to you is if you've got a bad actor, jump on it. We jump on it. We're not going to put our owners at risk like that. Plus, I'm not getting paid when they don't pay rent. So it really makes me mad. And this is a time sucker to the bone, and it drives me crazy. So I'm usually pretty grumpy by the time we get them out. But it is not a difficult process. The process starts with, let's just assume we're working on somebody that didn't pay rent. Our rent is due the 1st to the 4th. It's late on the 5th. Now, state law says if they don't pay it on the 1st, I could post notice on the 2nd, just so you know. Even though your lease says it's late on the 5th, you could post notice. Rent is due on the 1st. That's what usually the lease says, but there's a grace period is what it's called, and that's what it says in our lease, and then they are late on the 5th. I don't post before the 6th, and the biggest reason is I have numerous properties, and I usually don't know because my accountant she reconciles all of the rent payments by the 5th. So if she says, Xenon's not paying rent this month or hasn't paid rent, then we text, call, and email and say rent was due and it's officially late. You need to pay by today, and you are getting a late fee, or we will begin the process of eviction. If they respond, they tell me it's coming. Oh my gosh, you know, we just came out of the most popular time of the year. From November and December is the most time because people travel and they forget to set up their auto pay and they forget about rents. It's over the holidays. It never fails. So I usually expect it. But anyways, if they don't respond or anything, I have a notice served by the court processor. It has to be a weekday. So the first weekday that I can post after the 5th, I will post. It might be the 6th or 7th, or if we're on a weekend, it'll be the very following Monday. They will have a notice posted or served to their hands by a court processor by 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock that afternoon. And it's a 3-day demand for possession or compliance. That's what the state law says. They have 3 days to make it right and pay their rent or get out. They don't physically get out, by the way. Never, never. But they have to get it in. If they don't do it, My attorney will call me and say, did they pay rent? And I say, no. They said, okay, we're going to court or we're filing for eviction the next morning. If the eviction is filed, now it's on their record. It's not on their record when they're served a demand for compliance. That's just a notice. Usually I would say 95% of the time, it scares the bejesus out of them. So I highly recommend doing it. And they comply, and usually I don't have any other issues. If they're dumb enough to fight me on it, then we go to the attorney, we file for eviction. It's now on their record. And we usually get, when they file for eviction, we'll get a court date in 10 days. Attorney does it for me, goes to court. Usually the tenants show up and they'll try to negotiate on our behalf something with the tenants. Tenants will then try to negotiate with me, like, can we stay and pay? I just had this happen and I said, no way, get out. And they're still not out, so now we're waiting for the sheriff. You really don't want to wait for the sheriff if at all possible, but sometimes you just don't have a choice. You can't get them out. You cannot take possession of a property unless they sign a waiver that they're giving up their stuff. If their stuff is in there, you can't take possession. If it's empty, you can go in, change the locks, and take possession. So like I said, this could be a long, long conversation, and I don't want to get too detailed in it. But what I have experienced is many owners, especially those self-managing, are afraid to go through the eviction process because they think they hear the word attorney and that equals huge dollar signs. I'm going to tell you, you can probably evict someone for about $500, and if you need the sheriff, it's an additional $140. It's not that expensive, and it's your asset. For God's sake, get it back. It's not worth being afraid to go for an eviction. And I was one of those. It's about $320 to file in most counties, and the attorney doesn't stab it at you. They do this day in and day out. They know what they're doing. So, and I don't recommend you doing it on your own. It's so much less painful to have an attorney doing it. Are there questions coming in on that, Chris?
Nope, none.
Okay. Happy to talk about it, but the moral of that story is don't be afraid to get your property back. So let's just talk a little bit about what happens when, and I want to be conscientious of the time. So what happens when tenants pay rent? So the days of collecting checks, I think, are getting farther and farther, driving around all your properties, collecting a check, hoping it's going to clear, all of that, yada, 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 getting cash, all of that. So we do a lot of online payment. Here's the downside of online payment. Two things. If you have roommate situations, and we have about 3 houses that are special cases, we only allow one payment for rent. It's in the lease every single month. So if it is a roommate situation, one person's the designated payer, okay, per month. I don't care if it's not the same person every month, but do not partially pay your rent and hope that your roommate's paying. Don't do that. And I don't know if you all know why. It's the same reason of, let's say a tenant gets in and they have a $2,000 rent payment and they pay $1,000 and they say, I'm going to pay the other $1,000 in about a week when I get paid. That's bad. And the problem with online rent payment is you can't reject it. If they were giving it to you physically, you can reject that rent payment and evict. Once you have taken in any money, even partial, you cannot evict for that month. So that is the pitfall of how tenants pay rent on the online system. It can be a problem for us. It's very, very rare. But if I have a bad acting tenant, I will shut them out of my system, and they have to figure out how to get me a physical cashier's check for the full amount every month. I'm not going to drive around, not going to inconvenience my property managers, but they may not use my online system because they've been bad actors too many times. And bad actors a qualification for a bad actor is late rent payments, bounce checks, or partial payments. So that is the one thing about this new, our society of going electronically that can be dangerous for for owners, and especially, I can't stress enough, don't take partial payments and try to take one payment at one time. Then you have more ground to evict. Okay, so we'll kind of go through these quickly, but these are things to identify in your lease and things to remember.
One question before we move on. So Chris asked, how hard is it to lock the tenant out of your system?
Easy. I take them out of, I don't take them out of the system. I take their email out of the system. So every tenant sets up a secured login through their tenant portal, and they can there pay rent, set up auto pay, as well as make maintenance requests. So if I take them out of the system, it means I've deleted their username and email, so they no longer can get in. And I don't just do it and they don't know about it. I give them an email. Everything's always in writing. In my property management software, I send them an email through the software to say, you are not making good choices and you are out of our system. I don't say it that way, but you get the gist. I just tell them, bad boy, no more. Bad girl. So really quickly, these are just things to think about. You know, if you're in an HOA driven property in an HOA and it has rules and regs, we send the rules and regs with the lease signing. When they sign the lease, they're also signing that they've read the rules and the regs. They don't need all the documents. They just need to know what they're responsible for. Like, are you going to get penalized in my neighborhood if the trash can's out for one extra day? You want them to see and comply, because if you get a fine, we pass those fines straight through to the tenant. You can't do that if they haven't seen the rules and the regs. So make sure you share them. Are you allowing smoking and where? I highly recommend no smoking in any of the properties. You'll never get it out once you do, but that's your decision. What happens with parking? This is pretty famous for condos and townhomes that have deeded spots that are not, we're outside of the attached garage, so to speak. Those are important. What about security systems? So if the house has a security system, you as the owner must have that code, just like you must have a key. They can't change that on you, and don't let them. When are you going to inspect? We are in our properties every 6 months. One of the biggest things that when I started this company and I had my own rentals was I just couldn't imagine, what if you had somebody that, it doesn't happen anymore, but what if somebody moves in and you don't go back in that house for 10 years because they keep signing a new lease? What the heck? What's happening to the house? Never mind how are they treating it? And tenants have a tendency, depending on the level, of, oh, there was a dripping faucet, I didn't know that, and you've got now mold, or never mind the mold, what's happening to the cabinet or anything that's leaking? They just don't even pay attention. They're oblivious to it. Do inspections. Ask, you put in your lease that you will inspect, you don't ask. And we will do a 6-month property management inspection. We will ask them we'll give them a couple days. If they stonewall us, we say notice to enter, 24 hours, we'll be there with a key. You can be there or not, we don't care. We are hired by our owners to protect the asset. That's my job. How do they request repairs? Who do they contact? What happens in an emergency in the middle of the night when the water heater's failing? That's happened to me. Who's getting called? What happens when they shove stuff down the plumbing? Because they will. Who's responsible? How are you expensing that? How are you going to get reimbursed? Because you're probably going to pay the contractor. So these are all things that you need to, if it's not necessarily in your lease, things you need to be able to convey or talk to them about.
So Annemarie, we have a question.
Yeah.
Scott asked, do you charge owners for the biannual property inspections? If so, how much?
No, I do not. So we have a couple of levels. You'll see it on my website. When we go in on the 6 month, we call it internally we call it the sanity check, and it's kind of funny because owners call it the sanity check. Now, did you do my sanity check? That's what they say. And really, it's about 20 minutes inside the house. It started out was with they just wanted to know if there were holes in the wall. And now it's are there mysterious animals that weren't ever on the lease there? If you have an unfinished basement, do we have a mysterious what to be basil, but is probably marijuana plant growing? And then we look for water damage. Water is our nemesis for us as a property manager, and we're looking for water saturation, anything with water that's hurting the property. We don't charge, that's part of our monthly fee that we charge to our owners. Now we have since this year added 2 additional, what we call an asset protection inspection. And that is done by our inspector. It's about a 2-hour trip on a single family home. It's a full report. It's essentially like if you were buying the house and you hired an inspection. That's what it is. It's a full asset protection inspection. And we recommend that every other year. Understand, I would say 90% of my owners do not live in the state of Colorado. I have a half a dozen that live overseas. We truly are their eyes and ears, and they want to know what's happening on their homes. And so many of them will ask us to do that. If you live in Colorado and you've hired us and you want to go in during a property turnover when one tenant's going out and another one's about to come in, you know, or you can request an inspection with us. You can go with us on our sanity check. We don't have problems with that. You know, a lot of our owners will fly in and say, I want to see all my assets for the day. And we schedule an appointment. We ask the tenants to give us privacy so that they can look at the houses. And that's not a problem. We just need some notice. And you'll see on my website what I charge for the asset protection and whatnot. That's an every other year thing, and owners opt in or opt out of those on a regular basis.
So we got a question from we have a question from Mark. He says, how do you determine if a plumbing blockage is tenant caused? If paying for the Roto-Rooter fee, how is that determined? Who pays?
Have a really good plumber. Don't use Roto-Rooter. Have a really good plumber and educate your plumber, your contractor, to talk to you, not the tenant. That's the first and foremost. So one of my things that made my book was a maintenance inspection comes in and says, Mr. Maintenance, we shoved a pound of bacon down the disposal. We think we got it out, but the disposal doesn't work. Okay, really? That is going to be on them. If they and the title of that clip in my book is Garbage Disposal is Not a Wood Chipper. I mean, it is meant for very few things. We have tenants on a regular basis shove their entire dinner down the disposal. So when they call, and they will on disposals, we try to talk them through on the phone. Hit the reset, doesn't work. Do the crank, doesn't work. Okay, I'm going to send a plumber. If the plumber comes back and tells me it's because, you know, all of your turkey dinner went down the drain, you're going to pay for it. So, you know, these flushable wipes is the thing. People know not to do the feminine products for the most part. I don't get that, but the flushable wipes are really not flushable. And if I've got a toilet backup and I tell my plumber, if you're pulling out flushable wipes, I want to know, and don't talk to the tenant, please. That is a tenant charge. I am not going to pay for that or have my owner pay for that. So you just talk to you know, you'll if you have multiple properties, you want to have really good contractors that are an extension of you. And they're talking to you. We have educated our contractors. You are not to have conversation with tenants, period. Don't. So I think I addressed that. So the other thing is if you're going to escalate rent. So if we do happen to write a lease that's over 1 year, we will have a rent escalation clause in our lease that says owner has the right to up the rent, and usually we state up to 5%. I can't tell you how many owners tell me, oh, I really like them. They don't need to have rent increased. Please, at least do $50. It keeps tenants honest. It keeps them on their toes. They are supposed to be taking care of this property and value the property they are in. Yes, we do require renter's insurance. It's actually, I should change this. What I care about, I don't care about their stuff. I care about liability insurance. I care about their craziness or dumbness or ridiculousness of their friends in the house, and it might damage the property, not their stuff. So it's liability insurance, and on a single family home, I require a $300,000 policy for most single family homes.
And
we
do
also
you
require,
do you have the tenant send you a copy of that, or
yep,
you just
that's what I was just going to
assume?
Yep, so I was just going to say, we require them to list us on their policy and give us the declaration page. The reason you want to be, as an owner, listed on their policy, if they decide, oh, I'm going to save money, the owner's not going to know I canceled it in 2 months. Guess what? If you're on the policy, you get emailed that they did. They violated lease and you could evict. So ask them to name you. It's in our lease. They must name us in the policy. And they just name our company and then use our info email.
So, very nuanced question here. Does you being named on the declaration, does that give you more protection, or is that simply so you're in the loop as far as like insurance being active?
In the loop.
Okay.
Now for owners, I do ask, I don't care if I'm named on the policy for owner's insurance, but I do tell them, tell your insurance company that you're using a property manager, tell them who it is, because I've had several times, especially my owners that aren't here, I can start a claim without my owners. I mean, that's the whole point of a property manager is you just want money. You don't want the headache. That's our job. And so I can start a claim, and of course we communicate extensively with all of our owners on what's going on. But really, I mean, I did have a failed water heater in the middle of the night. I started the claim. I got the restoration company. They came and sucked it all out, did a 2-foot flood cut. By the time the owner was awake in the morning, I told him we're on the road to recovery. So, you know, that's our job. So let's just really quickly talk about move-ins, move-outs. So we have a process that we do, and we do this because our attorney has asked us to do it. We do take photos, but he likes videos. These videos are nothing special. They are 1-minute clips of walls, ceilings, everything, appliances, 1 minute in 1-minute segments, so he can quickly go through them. And it's a before, so it's a move-in video when nothing's there, might be a little bit of narration, and a move-out video. It's the before and after. We load it to the cloud. If anytime we have a litigation on security deposit, I send him the link to the videos, and it makes my life so much easier. Never really had to use them, but that's what he's requested to make life easy and quick on a litigation of deposit. But it's important it's funny, run the appliances. I can tell you I have not run a dishwasher, but I was thinking the other day about windows and checking windows, because one time in my early stages, I didn't check a window. And then I moved the next tenant in and I was checking windows and the whole window came out into my hand. And I was, you know, I should have charged the last tenant. So, you know, there's all kinds of things that you can do. You'll start to get a good feel for what level you need to do it based on the property. And if you've been in doing inspections, you kind of are knowing what's going to happen. Now, we do a lot of scoping of the property because in our lease, if they are not renewing their lease, we are listing for a new tenant 45 days prior to the lease terminating, and we try to limit the amount of vacancy for our owners. So when we are showing, we are also looking at the property to see what might be needed for a punch list between tenants on things we might need to fix, paint, repair, that kind of thing. So we're in that property quite often at the tail end. One thing that I think is important is Colorado law does not require tenants to be present at a move-in or a move-out inspection. It is not a requirement. We put the move-in liability on the tenants. So I do, or my staff, we do our videos. And then when we meet the tenant for key turnover, they have, I think it's about 10-page checklist that they go through. They go through it with a fine-tooth comb. They identify any issues in the property. We know what's there. And they'll probably send you a picture of a tiny little scuff. But I said, if it's not noted on here now, and I come in on the move out and I don't like what I see, it could be reconciled on the deposit. Now, one of the things that is a requirement for us is they get 72 hours to turn in that move-in sheet. If they don't, they give up their right. And when we do the move out, anything we find is free game. Within reason, obviously. I think we kind of covered renters enough.
Yep.
You know, our thing, if you're needing help, resource, we do work with quite a few real estate realtors in town. Because we don't do, and none of my property managers, while we are all licensed agents, we do not do any buying or selling, transactional selling. To be really good property managers, we don't have the time to list a house or put a buyer in our car, to be very honest with you. We refer those out. Or if we are managing a property that a realtor sent us and they decide they want to sell that property, we send them back to the realtor that referred us. We protect that client broker relationship. We're interested in being a resource, not interested in taking people's business. And I just was going to put up my contact info. That's my office line. That's my website. On the website, you can go to the tenants portion, and there's resources there for those that would like the handbook or the habitability law. These are some upcoming classes I'll be teaching next week. This class again, and it's 2 CE credits for realtors. It's also changes. I mean, you could take the class and then based on discussion in the class, we could go on a tangent about something else. I don't feel like I have to get through this PowerPoint. It's mainly to be a resource for you.
So we do have a couple questions here as we're wrapping up coming in.
For me?
Yes. So Steven says, where are the best places, like websites, to list rental properties at?
Oh, well, so my website pushes to 75 of the largest websites, but the top ones, that's interesting. The top ones will be Zillow, Realtor.com, RentBits, HotPads, but they are all kind of being bought together. If you are doing any kind of, we didn't even talk about this, but if you're doing any kind of fully furnished property, the corporate housing by owner is a good place. If you're doing short-term fully furnished, we do have 4 fully furnished. And then for us, we put it in the RE Colorado, the MLS. So if you're an agent, definitely put it there. I get agents asking me all the time why more property managers don't use that. And I got to tell you, I have a lot of agents placing tenants in my properties. So we utilize that. Now, we can address Craigslist and Facebook. I don't like either of those. The biggest reason is I've been scammed off of both of them, and there's no protection. So I just don't even, I mean, unless an owner is absolutely adamant that they want to be on Craigslist, I don't put it there anymore. Good question, though.
So you said you don't post to Craigslist or Facebook because you've been scammed on those?
Yep. Facebook Marketplace allows for posting of housing. I don't do it. I think my website will push out there as a notification that I've got a property, but I don't, it's not able to be scammed because it's coming from my website and my photos are watermarked. I was also going to address, if you wanted to know of a couple of places to run credit reports, annual, let's see, freecreditreport.com will do a credit report. And there was one other one, and I don't think this is it, but it could be. There's one called Credit Karma, Karma. And the other one I see here is annual. I don't think that's one that does a credit report though. Annualcreditreport.com. You can kind of Google those. There's some pretty common ones. I think they cost about $30, but I don't know that they run background, criminal and eviction history, which is really something that we're interested in as well.
Great. Well, I know, Annemarie, you mentioned your website and your phone number. Let me read those out since a lot of people listen to this. Your
Okay.
office phone number is 720-445-9515. And the website is Legacy PMCO. So Legacy, Legacy, P for property, M for manager, C for company, CO for company.com. And you got a couple upcoming classes, I think, was this next week, right? So tell them about those upcoming classes.
So I'll be doing this again live. One is March 6th from 10 to 12 at First Alliance Title on Harrison. And then March 7th, 10 to 12 again at First Integrity Title. And I have about 2 others scheduled later in the month. You can, contact me and let me know if you're interested. If you come to the live classes, obviously, and you're an agent, you would get 2 CE credits as well. But I'd be happy to. It's good information. You want to bring an investor, I'd be happy to meet, be a resource. We can meet face to face and chat as well.
And Ed asked, and just say we're out there before I ask this question, final questions, start putting them in there now because we're at the 90-minute mark, so we'll start wrapping up. So Ed asked, what software do you use to manage your portfolio?
I use Appfolio.
Appfolio? Okay.
Appfolio, Appfolio. It is more for property management company. If you're in property management, it's not a cheap. It comes with a website that is an interface. So when you go to my website, you will see up at the top tenant logins and portal owner logins, because they all have their own portals that they can view for their specific property or paying rent and whatnot. But then there's also information there. It's also where our listings are, where we post all of our vacancies that we have. We're bringing on houses about 2 a week. I think one of the things that I wanted to mention is I think one of the things that makes us really different is I'm an investor as well, and I work with a lot of investors. And because of my investors, some are in town, some are not, we do things a little bit extra than what most companies would do. One of the reasons agents come to us a lot of times is I have probably a dozen agents that regularly will send me their MLS listings of properties they're going to go look at with some investor, and what would be the rental analysis on each of those properties. So as I don't do it all the time. Every once in a while on some of my higher referring, I've gone house hunting with an investor and looked at it from a rental standpoint. This is what I'd rent it for. This is what I would do to capture more rent. I can educate you on areas that will rent really, really well, or areas even in, let's just take a place like Highlands Ranch. Highlands Ranch is very sought after from folks. They hear about Highlands Ranch. They want to live in Highlands Ranch. They've got a family. But there are pockets in Highlands Ranch that is overly rented. And because of that, investors will buy and expect a higher rent, but it's not possible. It is like, I have one area, I manage 2 houses on the block, and it's literally, I did a poll, it's 95% non-owner occupied. It is so heavily rented, we are almost capped at our rents because we can't go higher, and it's different property management companies. I am not that property management company that is interested in getting it rented for anything. I'm interested in pushing the market and getting the most for my owners, because I too have my own rentals, and the reason I do is for investment and residual income. So I get that. I understand that. And it's important for me to get the most I can for an owner. We also work a lot with, what is your monthly payment? What is your HOA, did you figure in when you were going to buy this an 8% at least minimum? I mean, Lon Welsh teaches this all the time. Put an 8% management fee in there when you're evaluating a new asset, even if you're going to self-manage, because life happens and at some point you could need a property manager and that asset won't be worth as much if you didn't figure it in on the front going in. So we really take it a little bit differently and take the spin a little bit differently in terms of what we do for our owners and for the realtors we work with. So would love to have conversation.
Great. Well, I think that was the last question for now. So I'm sure more will pop up, after this webinar or as people listen to the recording. So, and you said, just to clarify, people can reach out to you directly, right, Annemarie, if they want to follow up some questions
Absolutely.
regarding anything, right?
Sure.
Great.
Sure.
And just so I can say it verbally, what's the best email address for you?
Yep. So it's info@legacypmco, just like my website.com. Info is INFO at legacypmco.com.
Great. Well, everyone, thank you for coming out. I appreciate you sharing your morning with us. And Annemarie, thank you for teaching this class. It was a great one, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.